Hey everyone. I wanted to follow up my last video and talk about the cyber kill chain a little bit more. The cyber kill chain was developed by Lockheed Martin to match kind of the military kill chain concept, where that along the cyber kill chain, basically you had to be right once in order to stop the adversary. And we're looking at exploring how we can take this approach when we develop our own cybersecurity program. So the large frameworks that we talk about, NIST, CIS, these other things, they can be very onerous and takes time to implement. And the problem with that, meanwhile, until you get all the way through and then you start over, because it's a continual process, that you're missing large parts of protection. So, what I'm looking to do is to look at common attack scenarios, how they map to the cyber kill chain, and what we can do, what can we have in place today to prevent those activities in lieu of getting to those frameworks. Still do those frameworks, still work towards that end, but in the meantime, don't sacrifice being protected right now. So we're one of the larger things that companies are facing is this concept of business email compromise, where somebody either impersonates somebody or gets somehow in the conversation, usually leveraging your email account or somebody in your company's email account in order to get information, steal data, uh, drop malware, but most frequently some sort of invoice or money transfer fraud. So I'm gonna show my screen here, and this is how we've taken the concept of business email compromise and mapped it to the cyber kill chain. The cyber kill chain has 7 sequences in it, or stages. Within those 7 stages, there are 4 kind of 3 major parts of that. The pre-attack, sometimes in technology parlance, we call that left of boom. That's before the actual attack takes place. The attack at the booms point is when the actually attack takes place, and then post-attack, what do they do with their capabilities? So we'll start across from left to right. Uh, Reconnaissance. This is where the attacker is looking at open source material. They're checking LinkedIn. They're seeing who your contacts and clients are, potentially looking on your website to see how you do work with your vendors, how you get bids submitted, things like that. And at that point, they take that information and they look to weaponize it in some way, um, typically in the form of a phishing email, but it could also be that they acquired credentials, as you'll see in one of the examples as well. Then they deliver that attack. They gain exploitation. Um, they may or may not do some sort of installation of software, malware, backdoor that could lead them to allow them to do ransomware or other data theft. But typically in the business email compromise, we see other kinds of activity in accounts as opposed to malware. And then command and control, this could be controlling that malware if malware exists, or just manipulating the conversation, being able to uh, be part of that conversation when it comes to doing money transfers. So, and then eventually actually get the money in their banks. So, I we're looking at a couple of different examples. One which was um, the city of Saskatoon. The city of Saskatoon in Canada, what they received a business email compromise in this case, and what happened in their case is they identified the way the city did business. This is actually fairly obvious if you go to their website. You can see how they accept vendor applications and bids. So that part of the layout is all laid out to them. The attacker then created a credible impersonation of the CFO of one of the engineering organizations they were doing business with. And through that, they were able to deliver to the city's finance department by email an attack sequence and basically gain the trust of the finance department. And because they had some lack of robust verification process, they were able to exploit the attackers were able to exploit that human. And in this case, no malware was reported. However, the attacker at that point, because they were able to manipulate that finance employee, they were able to direct transfer funds to overseas accounts to the tunes of millions of dollars. So that was a fairly large attack on this city in Canada, but very typical process that they went through. If we look at our next example, this was something that was reported by Microsoft in part of one of their investigations. And there's some interesting points along the way that we want to touch on because we're seeing this very similar pattern, and you'll see it in some of it in our third example, where attackers again identify the target. They created a phishing email. In this case, they used a fake voicemail. The fake voicemail attachment actually opened up a website that looked like it was requesting your Microsoft credentials. Once the person logged in, they would go get a page not found error or something like that. But at that point, they've already collected that person's email, maybe even a token to log in. And then that is used to exploit the employee's email, plant some Outlook rules to divert the inbound emails to folders that aren't typically read. So you may not notice that emails from a specific, in this case, they did a broad range where it said emails related to invoicing or finance or what have you. Any of those kind of emails would automatically go into this other folder, and because they knew where they were able to go in there, manipulate it, and respond directly to that to those conversations. We've seen actually more specific cases where they actually said specific rules for specific companies, like the bank that they work with, and what have you. At that point, the attackers access the systems using US-based networks to bypass any potential alarms that would set off if they were connecting from a remote location outside the country. And then they use that to redirect funds by changing numbers in the bank information on an invoice. In our third example, we're looking at one that we actually investigated ourselves. And in this one, the attackers acquire credentials from an initial access broker or possibly a credential dump. We believe that it was a credential dump because if you look at some of the logs, we saw lots of failed attempts followed by a successful attempt. So they were likely targeting somebody. They collected information from the dark web, knowing that they were in typically a finance role. And they looked for credentials that may have been reused from another website. And that's typical. The attacker then created a lookalike domain and changed by changing one letter in the company's name, and the email acts. The employee acts. The attacker accessed the email of the employee using those credentials. Um, they created Outlook rules like the previous example. In this case, they were moving it to folders rather than forwarding it outside the company. And they were able to access those and get in the middle of the conversation, similar to the previous example. Then they were, again, accessed that account, created fake invoices, and led the actual victim company into paying an invoice that was meant to go to a vendor to the wrong location. So now in both of those situations, different way that they access the credential information, but also ultimately to the same ends. They accessed, they diverted emails, and then they sent the objections. They sent the fake invoices along the way. So what can we learn from these examples? Well, we can see that there were a number of points along the way that the victim could have identified that they were under attack. And the easiest way I like to look at this is work backwards. Ultimately, the last stage of the attack is manipulating an invoice to get a human to actually make the change. They're not causing the bank to send the monies in this case. They're manipulating the company to thinking that they are receiving an invoice from a legitimate resource. And so at this point, that human that is involved with taking that invoice can then pick up the phone, call, text, verify some other way other than using their email that they've been to see if this is a legitimate request. That doesn't cost any money. The only thing that does is cost a little bit of time and maybe slows down that process. So perhaps you can make a determination based on numbers, price levels, something, invoices over $1,000. Maybe you do this, or $5,000, whatever makes sense for you and your business, that you do this extra verification if anybody wants to change the record of an invoice. So this same check and balance can be said to, say, HR. If somebody requests, which is very common, a fake request of changing bank information for direct deposit. The good news is that most companies use an external payroll company and requires the external payroll company to be connected to in order to do these things online. However, many times HR folks are, again, manipulated into making these changes. So again, if you make that verbal connection as well, that secondary factor in this case to get approval for doing something like that. So similar to the secondary factor, you have the email request, and then you're asking for the phone. Same thing with your login and your password. In many of these cases, if they're using a two-factor authentication system, whether that's a token, whether that's even an SMS message, even though that's less secure, but still better than nothing, or you're using an application that you push to allow, all of those things are good ways to improve to increase the unlikelihood that somebody's going to access your account. Is it 100%? No. There's other ways that people can get in, which is why we also want these other checks. MFA is not a panacea. However, it does take care of a large amount of these kinds of potential exploitations. The other area that we can look at is how the emails that are coming in. If you get an email from a domain that has only been stood up in the last 60 days, many times they'll use that 30-day window that logs are kept as a potential buffer. If they're trying to attack somebody, they might set up a domain now and then try to attack them in 30 days. But again, like if you look at this, the chances are that this vendor that you've worked with for years and years, if the domain's fairly new, that would be an indication that maybe potentially something is wrong. The question here is that how do you do that? Well, that's something that you would have to do in software along with your IT team. That's something, additional check that your IT team can do. So that's another factor along the way. We also looked at the way that they were able to take access to an account and in a way have persistence by creating these Outlook rules. And that's another place that IT can assist here by creating alerts that when Outlook rules are created, first of all, prevent Outlook from creating forwarding rules. That's the easy one because you can just say no rules, no forwarding allowed to outside locations. And then the other thing is to alert on all the other rules that you've created an alert a rule to go into a folder. And if you've done this, then you've actually added an additional step. Does this put additional burden on your IT team? I would argue that they're likely not having to get too many of these to respond to, and it's a better for them to actually go and investigate, ask the question, pick up the phone and say, hey, did you create this Outlook rule that for any email that comes from Citibank to go into this mailbox? Maybe you ask that question, and then that it may or may not make sense why they had done it. If they had created the rule, great, you move on. If they didn't create the rule, now you can do an investigation. So that's a lot of times when we get involved, that's usually the tip off is this rule creation. So that's another way. If you have the ability to do some additional securing of your environment, don't allow people that are using non-company machines to log into their email accounts. So if they're using their mobile devices, that's one thing. But if they're trying to log in using a website or they're using Outlook on a different device, that besides potentially causing data leakage problems, you also can prevent this additional access from taking place. Let's say if a token is stolen, instead of trying to just use their password to get in. So again, number of ways that you can look at. You look at domain registration, the age of domain registration, the application of rules to Outlook, the multi-factor authentication on your logins, and then last that we talked about, actually second to last, was add additional rules around allowing non-company machines to access email. And then the last is the human element. That is, do a human verification before you send out or make changes to any of your financial instruments. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what some of the things that we're going to be talking about. It gives you, hopefully, I did talk a little bit about technical terms here, but a lot of this is business process oriented stuff. And it's very important to understand how money flows through your business so you can decide how can I put protections around that money so that the company does not fall victim to this kind of attack. In future videos, we'll talk about other similar kinds of attacks outside of business email compromise, but I wanted to start with this one because this is something you can take action with right now with minimal effort or cost. Multi-factor authentication is built into Office 365 at nearly every level. It just costs you a little bit of time and not a lot of not money. The additional verbal checks that we talked about, again, cost you a little bit of time and not any money, and so forth and so on. So hopefully that helps out. I look forward to speaking to you guys. And if you have any questions about anything we talked about, throw them in the comments below, and we're happy to talk to you soon. Take care.